Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the International Solidarity Pod, which is a podcast that aims to explore current affairs and history relating to imperialism, the global south, gender, political, economy, and people-to-people ties. I'm your host, Ashwin. This is going to be the first episode of our new West Asia series, which is dedicated to covering the latest developments out of Palestine and the Arab-Iranian region more broadly. When we look back at the history of the 21st century, the Gaza genocide and its regional reverberations are going to mark the beginning of a new era in global politics in many ways. It has pushed the bounds of what humanity will allow and has heightened the contradiction between the Western system of death making and the rest of the world's popular will for peace, development, and the right to life. Now it is more important than ever to continue to cover what's happening in West Asia, especially with the West's attempts to normalize this assault on humanity and the sovereignty of a people. This episode, we have on lawyer and activist Dimitri Lascaris to discuss the impending ground invasion of Gaza City, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians once again from the north to the south, the UN concluding that the Israeli regime is indeed committing genocide in Gaza, and the fallout of the Israeli airstrike on Qatar. I'll once again shout out Lifeline for Gaza. This is where you can contribute money to families on the ground in Gaza. The website bumps up fundraisers that have not received a donation in the past 5 days. You can also contribute to the Samir Project, which is a vital network in Gaza for distributing food, water, and tents. I'll leave those linked in the description below. Lastly, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, share this with others who could benefit from learning the latest updates in Palestine and West Asia. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dimitri Lascaris. Okay, Dimitri, thank you for making the time. Welcome back to the International Solidarity Podcast. Let's start here. There, has been relentless bombing in Gaza City and the areas, to its west for weeks now, specifically targeting taller buildings, where people are staying and Palestinians once again are en masse being displaced, ethnically cleansed into the south. And a side note here, some of these rides, when people are trying to move their stuff to the south via car or via truck, they're having to pay as high as $1,500, $1,600 is what I'm hearing from on the ground to have to move their things just to the south. I mean, it's incredible, and you can think of the number of people that might not be able to do that and either resort to moving on foot in some capacity, or staying put, right, as the ground invasion of Gaza City begins. So take it from here and give us your best sense of the latest developments in the Gaza Strip, and what to make of it.
Well, I think I probably should start with the report issued yesterday by the UN Commission of Inquiry, which, after months, and this is the highest level UN body, uh, arguably the most authoritative body in the world that has so far opined on the question of genocide. And they concluded that Israel is committing genocide, committing 4 out of the 5 genocidal acts identified in the Genocide Convention. You only have to commit one of those 5. If it's done with the requisite intent, genocidal intent, that's genocide. So they said Israel is committing 4 of the 5. And this adds to an overwhelming international consensus that Israel is committing genocide. The most prestigious group of genocide scholars says Israel is committing genocide. The Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem and Israeli Physicians for Human Rights, say Israel is committing genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the former UN Special Rapporteur and the current UN Special Rapporteur for Palestinian human rights have opined that Israel is committing genocide. I could go on and on. What we're seeing now is a logical, sort of evil, nefarious, logical progression to the ultimate objective, which is to remove all Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, whether by means of killing, torture, rape, sexual assault, starvation, all of these were identified as genocidal acts by the UN Commission of Inquiry and all these other bodies I mentioned. So we shouldn't be surprised by what we're seeing. This was the last area where there had not been, as of yet, large-scale devastation. And we can see very clearly, you talked about the high rises and other standing structures being blown up. They're not even pretending anymore, the Israelis, that there is some legitimate military reason for destroying these structures. So nobody should be surprised by any of this. This is clearly the next stage in the genocidal project. And if they succeed in driving all the Palestinians into concentration camps on the border of Egypt, they will either kill them or they will die from starvation and preventable disease, and or they will be driven into the Sinai Desert. And the problem will then become that of the dictator of Egypt. That's been clear for well over 18 months, if not longer, Ashwin. So, I mean, what more needs to be said about this than what we're witnessing is simply the next phase in a genocide. And the question remains, who in the international community who has the ability to deter Israel's genocidal project is going to take the first step? That's really the question. And so far, to be perfectly blunt about it, no state that has the capacity to stop it. There are at least two and some non-state actors who have tried, including Ansar Allah in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. But they collectively have not been able, despite all the sacrifices that they've made, all the dangers that they've assumed. And clearly, for this to end, there's going to have to be some kind of an escalation in the opposition to Israel's genocidal project.
What do you think is driving this, this particular invasion of Gaza City? I mean, what is the logic behind it? And what can we expect to come out of the other end? I mean, is this from the point of view of the Israelis and the US, which we should say Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in occupied Palestine and Israel meeting with the leaders of the Israeli regime, just as or right before this ground invasion is beginning. So, what is really what's going on here? What's the game plan behind this? And what does this spell out for Palestinians in Gaza City?
Gaza City will be unlivable if this continues, and that is exactly what the intention is. The goal is very simple: kill as many Palestinians as possible, or by other means cause their death. And for those who manage to survive, make it so unbearable for them that they will leave. That's the goal. I mean, this is simply part of that larger project. And as I say, if people can't see that at this stage, they're either liars or fools. It's so obvious. I mean, what more can we say? Every day I find at some point or other I'm speechless to what I'm witnessing. That's when I mean, I never thought I would live to witness such obvious and brazen depravity. We've seen lots of genocidal crimes committed over the course of human history, particularly by Western states. They have emerged as the masters of genocide, the masters of extermination. But the level of audacity with which this is being done boggles the mind, simply boggles the mind.
I asked that in a sense because I'm wondering. I mean, the Israeli regime is able to inflict destruction and chaos. I mean, I think they're pretty effective at doing that. But I guess from a strategic point of view as well, I'm wondering how far can this get, and that I think is an open question. That's maybe more what I was getting at, especially since over the past months you've seen sort of the Palestinian resistance factions having more success here and there in impacting, we can say, Israeli soldiers in their operations. So how do you see that dynamic then between those two sides as it pertains specifically to the invasion of Gaza City?
Well, the goal has always been consistent, but the tactics, I think, have changed because the Israelis, their military is under extreme duress. They have a suicide crisis. They have the depletion of weapon stocks. There are tens of thousands, if not well over 100,000 reservists who are refusing to show up for duty. So the way they have gone about implementing the extermination of the Palestinian population has evolved. And I think the current emphasis they're placing is on minimizing Israeli casualties. So you see, for example, that they're starting to use robots, explosive robots that go into neighborhoods, and a single one, based on videos we've seen, can basically annihilate an entire block of civilian infrastructure. So the tactics have evolved because Israel is feeling severe strain militarily and from a societal perspective. The country is exhausted. The military it has been extraordinarily weakened, and they're fighting on multiple fronts. So as far as I can tell, all that has changed is that their approach to killing Palestinians has evolved in order to minimize the casualties in the Israeli military and to expedite the extermination. But the goal has been consistent from the very moment that Yoav Gallant, the former Israeli defense minister, now indicted by the ICC for crimes against humanity, announced that they were going to implement a total blockade on Gaza. At that moment, those of us who have studied, the Israeli genocidal entity and the suffering of the Palestinian people, we knew what was coming. And it's taken some time for reputable human rights organizations to come around, but it's now become undeniable. And if you look at polls in the West, they too, the majority of the populations in many Western countries now understand exactly what's going on, despite the relentless propaganda to which we're being subjected in Western countries in regard to this genocidal project.
You mentioned the independent UN inquiry and its finding of genocide in Gaza committed by the Israelis. You've also seen, the Irish president, calling to, suggesting to exclude Israel and countries that supply weapons to Israel, exclude them from the United Nations. That's a very interesting development. And then alongside that, you're hearing talks of the EU looking at, whether it might or might not suspend, trade with the Israeli regime. Um, you know, uh, I think it's pretty well established, obviously, that none of these moves are going to stop, the mass slaughter and stop the genocide. But how are you reading these three developments? At this stage in the war, in the genocidal war, you know, the tide has been shifting for a while. But yeah, no, to take us from there in terms of how you read these developments.
Most of the really this is the outcome will be determined in one of two ways. And one is that, I mean, if the Palestinian people are to be saved, it will happen one of two ways. It will happen because of the military, economic, and political defeat of Israel, or primarily military. And there is a serious prospect that that could happen because of the decrepit state of the Israeli military and the deep, deep divisions in Israeli society. The other is that Western governments finally grow a conscience. Actually, I don't think they'll ever grow a conscience at this stage. What will happen potentially is that pressure within their own societies will become so intense that they will have no alternative but to impose crushing sanctions on the genocidal regime. Those are the two ways that this can end without the completion of the genocidal project. I think there's a realistic prospect of both of those things happening in the near term to medium term. And one positive sign in the Western world has been Spain's total arms embargo on Israel. And as far as I can tell, this is the only real arms embargo that any Western state has actually imposed upon Israel. The Spanish government of Pedro Gonzalez has adopted a royal decree which prohibits purchasing weapons from Israel, selling any kind of military equipment to Israel, providing uh, components that could be used in military equipment to Israel, and importantly, whether this is done directly or indirectly. That's what a real arms embargo would look like. It would have the force of law. It would be applied to both sales and purchases of military equipment with the genocidal regime, and it would cover both direct and indirect provision of military equipment to Israel. Now, this is not to say that Spain has done everything that it can. It hasn't, but it's gone substantially further than any other government. And what encourages me is that I think all along there's been a kind of understanding on the part of the United States and Israel that, once there's a crack in the dam may burst. And because somebody needs to take the lead and be willing to deal with all of the fallout, which is not only, the sort of customary accusations of anti-Semitism and support for terrorism, but also potential retaliation from the United States, because the United States has openly threatened countries that sanction Israel. Spain, to a significant degree, has taken that lead. And then you see Belgium as well, although it hasn't gone as far as Spain, came out recently and announced a package of measures. So I think the dam is cracked. I think it's bursting. And really it falls upon us in the West because our governments, let's be very clear, they are the key to the completion of this genocidal project. Without Western support, it can't be done. So if enough people apply enough pressure on Western governments, and particularly the governments of the United States, Britain, France, and Germany, then eventually they will be forced to not only do what Spain did, but go beyond what Spain did. So we're heading in that direction, but it's not happening quickly enough. So really the need here is for civil society to step up. And I understand that, for a lot of people living in the West, this is quite risky, in the current political environment we're dealing with. People are being, they're being deplatformed. People are losing their jobs. People are being thrown in prison. People are being beaten in the streets. And with this whole business around, Charlie Kirk's murder, the Zionists and the neocons have escalated their war on Palestinian solidarity. So the risks are even higher now than they were previously. But we have to, we have to step up. I can't stress that enough. And I also recognize that, not everybody can make the same contribution, Ashwin. I'm in a relatively privileged position, so I can contribute more than most people. People who are just sort of minimum wage earners are much more vulnerable than somebody in my position. So I don't expect everybody to be able to make the same contribution, but everybody can make a contribution, however small it may be, in a variety of ways. And that's what's going to be required to bring this to an end, in my view.
I think last thing I want to touch on here is the Israeli regime conducted an airstrike on Qatar last week in an attempt to, quote unquote, eliminate Hamas officials that were working on ceasefire negotiations. What does this mean about the state of ceasefire negotiations, prospects for the end of the war? I think you talked a little bit about that, as well as, maybe particularly here, as well as for, the other compliant Arab regimes in the region.
Well, I just actually published a report about this 30 minutes ago. Uh, the attack on the Hamas negotiating delegation in Qatar. I don't think any sensible person denies this anymore. What was sought to be done there by Israel was to kill the negotiating process because they have no interest in any kind of negotiated peace. Uh, they're hell bent on extermination. Um, and when this happened, the Qatari regime came out with guns a-blazing, accused Israel of state terrorism, vowed retaliation, convened an extraordinary emergency summit, as they called it, in Doha of the Islamic Cooperation Organization and the Arab League, which are comprised of 58 states spanning 4 continents. And on Monday, they issued their final communique. a lengthy communique with 22 operative paragraphs. It consists of, 2,700 words approximately. But if you parse it carefully, as I have, I've gone through it several times, it does not impose or express an agreement to impose a meaningful, not one, meaningful economic sanction on Israel. It makes no mention of military retaliation, which Qatar is perfectly entitled to uh, uh, engage in at this stage because of the act of war Israel committed on its sovereign territory. Nor does it even call for the expulsion of Israeli diplomats from the states, the participating states. It's nothing but a massive blast of hot air, which I think anybody could have predicted. So it would be foolish of us at this stage to place any confidence in the. I mean, I don't want to put them all in the same basket because there are honorable exceptions when it comes to resisting the genocide. Probably the most um, notable one is Ansar Allah in Yemen. The price that they have paid is severe, and they nonetheless continue to try to impose, with their limited means, a military price on Israel for its genocidal behavior. Of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been engaged in open warfare with Israel. And there's the resistance in South Lebanon, which paid a very, very heavy price for almost I think 20 months of armed opposition to the genocide. But collectively, their power is limited, and people need to understand what they're up against is not Israel. It's not Israel. Israel is a pipsqueak. It's a country of some 10 million people. It's very small. The population is concentrated in a little triangle between Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. It's extremely vulnerable militarily. And none of this could be accomplished, despite what the Americans want us to believe, without the full blown support of the United States. So really what these resistance groups are fighting is NATO. This is a war against NATO, just as the war in Ukraine is a war against NATO. Whatever you're a fan of Russia or not, NATO is waging a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. And that should be crystal clear to anybody at this stage. The Russians, who have, in many respects, the world's most sophisticated military and a population of some 140 million people and the largest resource base in the world, in a war that started in February 2022, are still fighting and dying every single day. So if this is so much of a challenge, taking on the collective military capacity of NATO, which, its combined military budget at this stage is probably in excess of $2 trillion a year. If the Russians find that so challenging, imagine what the challenges are for people living in the global south to take on the combined military force of NATO. That's what these groups are doing. Their courage is extraordinary. Their determination, their solidarity with the Palestinian people is historic. I mean, that's just a fact. And I don't give a damn if anybody takes umbrage at me saying that. I'm on the side of those who oppose genocide, and they're on the side of the victims. So we have to be realistic here. Despite their courage, despite their sacrifice, the forces arrayed against them are enormous, ruthless, and they need help. And that's where we as citizens of the West come in. We can bring this to an end non-violently, which is my preferred option and that of any person of conscience. But that means we have to force our governments to impose crushing sanctions on the genocidal entity.
Do you see, you know, do you see, sort of the Arab regimes around occupied Palestine, the Israeli regime, you know, acting differently now, or looking to act in a different kind of direction after this violation of Qatar's territorial integrity and sovereignty? Or do you see it as, more of the same? This is another sort of red line that was being tested by, Israeli regime and the US, and it seems like there's been no consequences to it.
Well, for the time being, it's more of the same. And, if people want to see why I believe that, they can watch the report I just published. Go through, I can, people don't want to read that entire communique and parse the 2,700 words. I've summarized the essence of the communique in my report, but basically, there's no indication that they're changing their subservient approach to Israel and to its masters in Washington. But the behavior of Israel could ultimately provoke a change in approach from these regimes. And I think what would probably, not probably, but possibly cause them to finally act collectively to stop Israel's aggressions is that Israel does real damage to the ruling elites of these countries. The attack in Qatar had no significant impact on the ruling elite of Qatar. They destroyed a few, civilian structures in the heart of Doha. Was it embarrassing? Yes. Was it humiliating? Sure. Did the Qatari regime wish that it didn't happen? I suspect that they would rather that it didn't happen because it creates a political problem for them. But it didn't really affect in any significant way the privilege and power and status of the ruling elite in Qatar. And the way things are heading, eventually, Israel, because every message Israel is receiving is one of capitulation. And when they see that they're being given the green light, they escalate. That's been going on for decades. So eventually, they may actually strike at something that really matters to the ruling elite of one of these Gulf autocracies. And I think at that stage, something may change, especially because these regimes have increasingly close economic and political relations with the non-Western world, and particularly China and Russia and India. So they have an option. They may be able to transition from, an alliance, de facto alliance with Washington and other Western states to an alliance with the BRICS. So the combination of these two factors, the existence of this alternative that wasn't available to them for a long time, and probably the inevitable Israeli escalation that causes them to become concerned for their own wealth and power and privilege, I think may actually cause a significant change. And the other factor that may cause a significant change is uprising from the streets, the Arab streets, in one or more of these Gulf autocracies, which could happen at any moment. But we have to be realistic about this. People in that part of the world, in places like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, who offer real resistance to the ruling elites, take their lives into their own hands, not just their own lives, but the lives of their families. This very, very dangerous thing to oppose the ruling elites in the Gulf autocracies and the other states in the Arab and Muslim world that are beholden to Washington. So I don't blame them. I've been there, I've seen it, and it's extraordinary how much they can be made to suffer for putting up some kind of opposition to the ruling elites. But they, at some stage, may say, just as the Palestinian people have done, the alternative is worse. Subservience is worse than the risks and dangers occasioned by opposition to the ruling elite in my country. And if that becomes the calculus, if they decide that the alternative is worse, in other words, subservience is worse than opposition and resistance, they'll resist. And if they start resisting on a mass scale, you may see something happen, such as this happened in Egypt, in the era of Anwar Sadat, who was actually assassinated by people who were infuriated by his accommodation to the Israeli regime. This could play out a lot of different ways. And the final factor I should mention is, of course, Israel's going to escalate to the point where it will resume the war against Iran. That's a third way in which this could come to an end. The Islamic Republic, I think, has demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that it has the military capability to impose terrible, terrible costs on Israel for its criminal behavior. And although I don't think they're going to launch any kind of a preemptive strike, if they are provoked again, this could get real ugly. And it may actually occasion the strategic and military defeat of Israel. So there are several ways that can play out, but I cannot stress this enough. All people of conscience should prefer the peaceful path, the nonviolent path, the path that causes the least human suffering. And that means Western governments have to be compelled to impose crushing sanctions on Israel.
Before I let you go, Dimitri, um, you mentioned Charlie Kirk. I don't know if you've seen in the Canadian Parliament, they gave both sides of the aisle, conservatives and liberals, gave a standing ovation, commemorating, Charlie Kirk's, assassination. Um, there's that. I also wanted to get your comments on Chrystia Freeland's new appointment as Canada's special representative for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Yeah, your thoughts on these?
Well, let me remind your audience that the same parliament gave a standing ovation to actually to a Ukrainian Nazi. Uh, Now, am I implying that Charlie Kirk was a Nazi? No, I'm not saying that. But Charlie Kirk certainly expressed views repeatedly that are deeply offensive to people of conscience. You know, the things that he said about Muslims were absolutely horrible. It was hate speech. For years, he peddled hate speech against Muslims and against Arabs. And he said terrible things about our brothers and sisters in the Black community. Um, Now, towards the end of his life, as I myself have noted and talked about on my program, Charlie seemed to be raising serious questions about Israel, including the claim that Israel is, which is entirely correct, that Israel is engaged in ethnic cleansing. He was talking about the power of the Israel lobby. He was talking about how people, Zionist donors to his organization, very influential organization, were insulting him, threatening him. Um, so he was 31 years old, as I understand it, when he died. And when I think back to the positions that I held, the beliefs that I held when I was 31, frankly, I didn't have his beliefs, but I'm frankly embarrassed by them. I've evolved enormously in the latter half of my life, and there are some indications that Charlie Kirk was heading in that direction. But the totality of his record is really quite disgraceful. And there's no sensible person with a basic commitment to human decency would think that this young man deserved a standing damn ovation. I mean, give me a break. A standing ovation? Why don't you give a standing ovation to the over 200 Palestinian journalists who have been murdered by Israel? That's heroism. Why don't you give a standing ovation to the tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have been massacred by Israel? That's heroism. Why don't you give a standing ovation to the resistance fighters who have laid down their lives to stop this genocide? That's heroism. That merits a standing ovation. Charlie Kirk? Are you kidding me? But why would anybody be surprised after, two standing ovations for a Ukrainian Nazi? And the second part of your question, Chrystia Freeland. Um, What can we say about Chrystia Freeland? I mean, on the one hand, I'm happy that she's finally mercifully departed the Canadian political scene. She's a frothing, warmonger, frothing at the mouth warmonger. I tended to refer to her as the Canadian version of Victoria Nuland. There's, never a neocon war that she didn't like. I think she's genuinely, racist against the Russian people. Whatever you think about the Russian government, um, the people of Russia did not deserve the invective that Chrystia Freeland regularly directed at the state. But really, she was a dangerous neocon, and she's mercifully left the scene. But on the other hand, these people like her, like Victoria Nuland, Madeleine Albright, former presidents of the United States, somehow they end up returning to the scene in uh, you know, uh, some international capacity. So they become, the Secretary General of the United Nations, or they become the executive director of the IMF, or they're put in charge of some think tank. I don't think we've seen the last of Chrystia Freeland. She'll have less power now than she did when she was the deputy prime minister, which is a good thing. But she ain't going away, and I suspect that she will be rewarded somehow handsomely by the oligarchy for her faithful service to their imperialistic projects.
Thanks for that, Dimitri. And yeah, I think maybe one thing I'll say on the standing ovation in Parliament, I think this is really one of those examples where we've been seeing this pattern consistently over the past years, where essentially the right sets the agenda, And by the right, I mean, the Conservative Party and then elements rightward of it. And then, the supposed center, the Liberal Party, falls in line and drifts rightward, in this kind of shifting the center of politics. And I think you see that quite clearly here. And then that's also, you know, emblematic of the fact that there's no there, the left of the center, um, uh, in the Canadian political scene is very weak. And if there were stronger forces on that side, there would at least be some kind of balance between the two. But in the absence of that, this is what happens with, the center of the political spectrum shifts further to the right. Um, but yeah, I think that's a
Absolutely. That's a very, very
go ahead,
important point,
Dimitri.
Ashwin.
Yeah.
Phenomenon. I just say that's the phenomenon I've been witnessing my entire life, and it's arrived at a truly dangerous point. The right has control of the political agenda of Western governments, and this incident you described, the standing ovation for Charlie Kirk, is just one example of that. I think we're at a very, very dangerous moment. Um, we could see a mass outbreak of political violence, and let us not be naive about this. The primary perpetrators are going to be people on the far right, and the primary targets are going to be people on the left and people, anti-imperialist people of conscience. And that's the direction we're heading in. And people need to be cognizant of the political realities that we now confront. They're dire. Now, I want to just conclude it because I express these opinions, but I really, really believe, based on evidence, I could be wrong, I could be terribly wrong, that the arc of history will lead us to justice in the end. But the question in my mind is how terrible will be the price before we arrive there?
And how long will it take? Yeah, this is something I think about as well
Absolutely.
quite frequently. But anyway, I think that's a good place to leave it. I really appreciate you taking the time, Dimitri, to come on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashwin.